Before Rasheeda had finished reading the message, the room fell silent. Her hands began to shake, not because she didn't comprehend the words, but rather because she did. The choice had already been made, and she was learning it through whispers, just like everyone else. Insiders claim that Rasheeda was taken completely by surprise when Kirk Frost allegedly made a move that rocked not only their marriage, but the entire hip-hop and love industries. A surprise move involving Jasmine Washington. This was not just another disagreement. This wasn't one more rumor. This was the last one. Rasheeda did not scream, according to sources. Nothing was thrown by her. Sitting silently and gazing at her phone, she realized that everything she had worked so hard to preserve might be disappearing once more. Supporters believed they had already witnessed the worst. The public humiliation, the baby scandal, and the cheating. However, if the reports are accurate, it is different, because it is no longer about an error. It had to do with a decision. And as soon as that decision was made, the harm could not be reversed. The same question is now being asked by everyone. How did it make it this far? What has become of Rasheeda? Rasheeda relied on resiliency for years. She grinned in public despite the criticism. In private, she carried wounds that most people would have ignored. In ways that few marriages endure, her union with Kirk Frost had already been put to the test. Nevertheless, she persisted because she believed in healing rather than because she was weak. When the Rasheeda didn't rush to the cameras to cry when the cheating scandal first came to light years ago. She managed it discreetly, preferring accountability, boundaries, and counseling to mayhem. Rasheeda understood her decision, even though fans didn't always. She desired security for her family, herself, and the life she had laboriously created. Jasmine Washington followed. Jasmine's presence initially seemed like another storm that Rasheeda would have to endure. Accusations, rumors, and a child that had long-term repercussions. Rasheeda put up with public humiliation that never completely subsided. People would whisper her suffering back to her whenever she entered a room, but she persisted. She suffered emotionally as a result of that choice, but it also made her more resilient. She developed compartmentalization skills and learned to prioritize survival, motherhood, and business. Instead of blindly trusting love, she learned to manage it. Things were never as peaceful behind closed doors as they seemed on camera. According to friends, Rasheeda battled resentment that she was unable to let go of. It was not erased by forgiveness. Recollection. It simply made it stop talking. Silence also has a way of increasing tension. Kirk, however, moved in a different way. According to people familiar with the matter, Kirk always thought that things would get better with time. He underestimated something crucial, but staying together was sufficient evidence. Forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, according to Rasheeda. Rather than resetting, she was healing. The gap between them didn't widen as the years went by. It stretched. Little disputes persisted. Longer. There were no thorough discussions before decisions were made. And Rasheeda noticed a change in herself when Jasmine's name came up once more in private conversations. Recognition, not fear. She was familiar with this place. The sense of finality was what set this moment apart. Rasheeda sensed Kirk was no longer choosing repair, according to friends. He was making a decision. Furthermore, agreement is not necessary for direction. She felt more than just betrayal when she learnt of Kirk's purported plan to move forward with Jasmine permanently. It served as confirmation. Confirmation that her efforts to keep the marriage together may not have been reciprocated. Verification that when respect erodes, endurance is insufficient to maintain a relationship. Verification that being in love with someone does not shield you from their choices. Rasheeda withdrew emotionally. She refrained from publicly lashing out. She didn't share mysterious messages. Leaning on a tiny circle that understood how much she had already survived, she turned her attention inward. Those close to her claim that she repeatedly asked the same question and over. When is sufficient? Walking away wouldn't simply end a marriage, so that question plagued her. It would put an end to a chapter that she had worked so hard to keep open. In order to stay, she had to accept a reality that she could no longer tolerate. And in that moment between staying and going, Rasheeda had to confront a reality she had shied away from for years. To maintain love, you shouldn't have to erase yourself. What Kirk might do next wasn't the threat at this point. It was what Rasheeda would ultimately make her own decisions. Rasheeda was surprised by how quickly the story gained publicity. There was no formal announcement about it. It didn't originate from a sit-down interview or a court document. Whispers that became screenshots and screenshots that became headlines brought it to light. Dating wasn't the word spreading. It wasn't getting back in touch. It was getting married. Several sources claim that Kirk Frost had been having private discussions that implied he was getting ready for a move forward with Jasmine Washington indefinitely. Not as a plot, not as conjecture, but as a choice. The pain turned into something colder when Rasheeda discovered the origin of the rumor. There was no miscommunication. Someone wasn't misrepresenting words. It originated from those who thought the decision had already been made. Rasheeda didn't confront Kirk right away, according to friends. Before feeling anything, she needed clarity. She listened, watched, and waited. Additionally, when she eventually asked him directly, his answer didn't bring relief. It created a gap. Kirk acknowledged that he had thought about it, according to people close to the couple. He described it as planning ahead, acting morally, and achieving stability. Rasheeda, words that seem soothing until you see what they leave out. The first crack was that. The second occurred when Jasmine allegedly acknowledged in private that discussions had progressed beyond co-parenting, that plans were being discussed, and that Rasheeda's place in the future was being imagined. The truth struck hard at that point. This was no longer a triangle. It was a moment of change. Tears or yelling did not accompany the startling turn of events. It came with documents. According to a person with knowledge of the matter, weeks prior to the rumor, Kirk had already started consulting regarding the logistics of a legal separation. Not completed, not filed, but ready. To be prepared is to have made a decision. In that instant, Rasheeda came to a realization that altered her perspective on the marriage as a whole. She had been struggling to keep something intact. Kirk was getting ready to go in silence. Although the imbalance was not new, it was now clearly visible. Fans' reactions to the story were overwhelming. On Rasheeda's behalf, some were incensed. Some wondered why she stayed for so long. Some stood up for Kirk, saying that people change and evolve. The clamor became harsh, rapid, and loud. Rasheeda remained silent. People who knew her were concerned about her silence, because it didn't seem like avoidance. It was a sense of resolve. Rasheeda met with family and advisors behind the scenes. Not to organize a response, but to organize her subsequent actions. In terms of money, feelings, and privacy. She wasn't getting ready for a show. She was getting ready for a change in her life. Then the detail that turned everything upside down once more appeared. The purported marriage plan wasn't just about romance, according to a reliable source. It had to do with narrative control. Kirk could present the conclusion as progress rather than failure by taking a decisive action. Where chaos had once existed, he could bring stability. The circumstances were reframed by that discovery. Completely. There was more to this than just picking Jasmine. It was about picking a conclusion that worked out for him. Rasheeda stopped asking unanswered questions once she realized that something inside of her had settled. When honesty arrived too late, she stopped waiting for it. And she came to her own conclusion. To defend herself, not to respond or take revenge. Kirk's purported plan was not the first startling turn of events. Rasheeda realized she didn't have to fight to be selected anymore, because she was finished trying out for a position she had already earned. And what follows was made possible by that realization. Loyalty splits when the world responds, and everything is altered by one ultimate truth. Everything around Rasheeda began to move more quickly than she could comprehend once the rumor reached its peak volume. The phones kept ringing. Friends came in. Silent questions were posed by business associates. Additionally, a plethora of opinions ranging from sympathy to condemnation were posted on social media by fans. Some asked Rasheeda to respond. Others called for responsibility from Kirk. Few people took the time to think about how difficult this moment truly was for her. There was more than just public pressure. It was intimate. Rasheeda started to notice things that she had previously refused to see. Unanswered calls that were missed. Discussions that seemed hurried. Before she was even informed, decisions had already been made. It wasn't a blatant betrayal. It was a silent replacement. Kirk, meanwhile, maintained his composure in public. People were uneasy about that calm. Rather than refute the reports, he made vague remarks about relocating, moving forward, choosing peace, and acting morally. On the surface, those words sounded mature, but they omitted the one point that everyone wanted clarification on. That avoidance stoked suspicion, Rasheeda. Then a private message appeared. The statement, "This was always going to end this way. I just waited until it made sense," was purportedly sent by Kirk to a close friend. It wasn't dramatic or scandalous, but it was powerful, because it implied that the marriage didn't end due to a single choice. It was over. Since the conclusion was predetermined. Soon after, there was a second significant twist. Rasheeda had actually received an ultimatum months prior, according to a source. Not loudly, not violently, not in public. She was informed that she needed to be flexible, and that some arrangements would change. She understood it to mean healing, adjustment, and boundaries at the time. It didn't. It meant getting ready to leave. People's perception of Rasheeda's silence was altered by that revelation. She wasn't caught off guard. She was in a tight spot. Asked to accept change without being fully informed. She was supposed to maintain her composure as the ground moved beneath her feet. Public opinion changed once more as this information spread. Why Rasheeda stayed was no longer questioned. They began to question why she was expected to live with uncertainty while someone else planned certainty. Jasmine's role also became more apparent. According to sources, Jasmine thought she was moving toward stability rather than controversy. She observed Kirk's serenity as confidence, his assurance is dedication. However, even she reportedly questioned the cost and timing as the backlash intensified. Tensions increased behind the scenes. Legal discussions became serious. Boundaries were established. Rasheeda and Kirk started communicating less and less directly. Just logistics and clarity, no emotional back and forth. Then Rasheeda did something that nobody anticipated. She said a few words. Not in a live setting, not in an interview. Within a, "I won't compete with someone else's decision," she said in a quiet room with people she trusted. It wasn't furious. It wasn't resentful. It was final. The second big twist had nothing to do with announcements or marriage papers. It had to do with shifting power. Rasheeda gave up hoping, negotiating, and waiting. She started envisioning a future devoid of justification and perseverance. A future based on decision-making rather than survival. And everything changed after she did that. Because the story no longer belonged to Kirk the instant Rasheeda made her own decision. It was part of what followed. Everyone would have to face a reality they weren't yet prepared for as a result of that next step. No headline could adequately convey the impact of the fallout on Rasheeda's world. Public support was overwhelming. Her admirers wrote that she was patient, graceful, and strong. Many acknowledged that they had previously passed judgment on her without realizing the extent of her suffering. Others expressed their sincere regret for asking why she stayed. Concern replaced criticism in the tone. It was more difficult in private. The weight of years suddenly fell on Rasheeda. The identity she had developed around keeping things together, not just the marriage. It had been expected of her to make concessions and forgive in order to maintain harmony. She had to rewrite her self-perception in order to let go. Quietly, family intervened. No drama, no public declarations, just gifts, lengthy talks, late-night check-ins, and people reminding her of her former self before survival became her default setting. The business side responded quickly. Support was extended by brand partners. While some provided opportunity, others offered flexibility. It became evident that Rasheeda's worth had always been based on her work ethic, consistency, and audience connection rather than her marriage. She found strength in that realization. Kirk Frost, meanwhile, encountered a different kind of reaction. His attempts to keep a composed demeanor in public started to feel detached from the situation's emotional reality. Viewers questioned his wording, his timing, his avoidance of details. He seemed farther away the more composed he was. According to reports, the couple's friends advised him to confront the situation head-on and acknowledge Rasheeda's suffering rather than defend himself. The silence increased the distance between accountability and explanation, regardless of whether he paid attention. Jasmine Washington was also drawn into the storm. She became the subject of conjecture that she had not asked for. While some blamed her, others stood up for her. Some realized that entering a situation shaped by years of unresolved issues had uncontrollable consequences. Loyalty was shattered by the public response. For some fans, Rasheeda was the only option. Some opted to remain impartial. Others intensified their defense of Kirk's freedom to proceed. However, this shift was the loudest. People no longer insisted that Rasheeda give an explanation. Her silence was accepted by them. Rasheeda started establishing boundaries on an emotional level. She had previously refused to let herself. She ceased to participate in commentary. She restricted who could use her time. She guarded her tranquility. Without expressing regret. She revealed something to her friends in a private moment that stuck with them. I believed that staying required strength, but leaving requires more bravery. Since public opinion was not the true impact, that sentence summed up the fallout. Internal freedom was what it was. Days later, Rasheeda's posture shifted. She appeared lighter, grounded rather than joyful or relieved, as if she had stopped preparing for the next blow. The world kept arguing over who was correct. Rasheeda ignored that query completely. And that change from protecting the past to choosing the future prepared the audience for this story's climactic moment. Because Kirk wouldn't provide the final twist. Jasmine wouldn't do it. Furthermore, it would not originate from the general public. It would originate with Rasheeda. Rasheeda kept her choice a secret.
Captions. No postad is dramatis, no explanation, jest ohne petire dat confide moretan word salt. Van stook notice rig het away. Te pjople matter het also dit. Sy had alreeds taken in het betet actions begin te scenes. Meetings voor legal matters had taken plaas in secret. Plans voor finances weer examinet. Boundaries weer established. Thuis was not a response. Het was getting reality. Rasheeda had no intention of fleeing te mariage. Sy was breaking free from a child that reired her to pit op witte moretan het everbruiget bak. Net te obskure detail emergit. Rasheeda had been asket montes earlier to seem supportieve of affetire sy wasn't part of, according to a reliable source. To maintain composure, to avoid upsetting anione and to make te transition apos. At dit time, sy agreed because sy touwget klaar het hy wild kome. It didn't. Everything was reframed by ta de stoverij. Te vast dat Kirk Frost was making plans voor te future was not soaking. In order for Shomyone else to move witte certainty, Rasheeda had been asked to assist in handling te optits of haar overreplacement. Wen sy bekame aware of so met een klik het, sy gave op trying to be honest. Sy gave op ontimelines. Sy kiase to justify choices sy didn't make. Tente in het bij dit moment arrivet. Rasheeda refused to record as sene taat wild halve presente te conflict as one of mutual development. Just affirm no walkout, no argument. Sy declined to take part in a story dat regeert haar toegrin at a foundation sy didn't want. Dat decision had repercussions. Plans weer modified by producers. Decisions kwamen to a halt. People bekame aware dat Rasheeda wild not no longer uit in softening te landing. Ten narratieve wild bepolis het. Sy wild uithertel het honestly or not at all. According to reports, Jasmine Washington also noticed te change. Tiere was nog no weiget attached to wat had onze see met Kirtijn. Public attention greef more intense. Suddenly te futire sy beliefheid to but certain see met vulnerable to in anticipated questions. Kirk didn't sy aanuiting. But not te kite had a different sound. Not calm, not in control, just non-assistent. Meanwhile, Rasheeda took one last action that closed the chapter. In order to formalize the terms of her separation, sy verlet a private reis that was neither dramatis nor public. Not to protect, not to punish, not to set a door that had been left open for too long. Tiere was no vecht in the last twist. Tiere was no revelation. It was determinate. Rasheeda made her own decisions without seeking approval, offering an apology or rehiring consent. The cliffhanger is rigid here. One conversation has uit to take place. One reality that has not been publicly acknowledged. One choice that has a complete impact hasn't uittouched done. Bechouse wo won bete gestion when separation bekomes public, weet het wil. Woever ultimately rivalet te tritte first wil win. Antes mariage won simply beredefinet wen dat tritte komes toelig het. Wen het geases to beselent, het wil redefine wat streng te lookslike. Tenet chapter 1000 belong in remous so beprepare het. Rasheeda ovensit, antes is just getting started.